This video presentation offers the advice and thoughts of experienced individuals who work with crime victims in Indian country. They discuss the issues encountered in starting a new victim services program, what to avoid, and what to include in your planning and operation.
As the coordinator in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Montana or anywhere, we assist victims and witnesses as they go through the trial process. We contact victims and witnesses immediately as soon as we are aware that a crime has occurred. And depending on logistics, we try to meet with them personally or do correspondence through the mail and let them know what's happening with a case. Now that is after the FBI has contacted us and they keep us apprised of the investigation. And the FBI can keep the victims apprised of the investigation or the victim witness coordinator. We assist people during the entire court proceeding, keep them notified of when there's court hearings, when there's bond hearings, right through to sentencing and even after that. Particularly in my situation, we have a lot of young child victims. So it's very important to get them to understand what a courtroom is and what a judge is, what a prosecutor is. These are hard things for them. But we practice with them in the courtroom and try to make them feel comfortable and develop a rapport with them.
Now, if we were going to develop a new victims assistance program in Indian country at the tribal level, just how important is it for that new coordinator at the tribal level to get in touch with your office at the U.S. Attorney's Office and build a relationship?
I think it's absolutely critical, very important for those two coordinators to get together and develop a working relationship as quickly as possible. For one thing, the Federal Victim Witness Coordinator probably has been there for a while and can share some experiences. They can also introduce them to other people that are going to be important in the coordination of efforts. And for resources, I think that the Victim Witness Coordinator is the person in the U.S. Attorney's Office to talk to, and they are very willing and open to assisting local programs. Local programs can make the Federal Victim Witness Coordinator's job much easier if we work together because they're on site, they're on the reservation, they're there with the people. Many times we can't be. In Montana, I am one coordinator for the entire district. I do have an assistant that can do some of that, but I believe if we can work together, we can solve a lot of our problems and we can do much better work for our victims and their families.
Now, in terms of jurisdictional conflicts, it sounds like you try and reach out and create relationships in your field. But what about law enforcement? What about the courts? Are there tugging and pulling in those areas?
There definitely is. I take it upon myself to try to aid those agencies in coming together and sharing information because I believe it is so important. There are definite jurisdictional issues because we've got, in some instances, you know, the tribal law enforcement, BIA law enforcement, FBI law enforcement, and we might have a county law enforcement. So what we believe is important is that people understand those jurisdictional issues, and that training is very important so that people know, and that training for law enforcement, I believe that's also one of the things that a victim assistance program should do, is train law enforcement, you know, on jurisdictional issues. And the U.S. Attorney's offices can provide that training for law enforcement. And it makes life much easier. If we have a victim and everybody's standing there saying, I don't know what to do, I don't know if it's yours, I don't know if it's mine, what we always say is jurisdiction can be determined later. You know, you need to take care of, especially if it's a violent crime, you need to take care of the investigation.
Now, you're located in the U.S. Attorney's Office. What's the ideal location for a VAIC program at the tribal level?
I think it's good to be tied to a program, to another office, to have that support. But I also think that, you know, from my experience and what I've seen, they can stand alone as long as they have the support of those other agencies. If they have developed excellent relationships with their police departments and their, you know, their investigators and FBI, they can stand alone and do an excellent job.
What are some of the don'ts in starting a new program?
Don't ever be afraid to contact people for information. That is, you're going to get your information from other people. You're going to feel like you're struggling. You're going to feel overwhelmed. Don't feel overwhelmed. When I first started in this position 6 years ago, and I had done a lot of other work in victim advocacy, but I was overwhelmed. But I had other people telling me that do not be overwhelmed. It will come. It will take time. You will develop these relationships, and you will be serving people. Don't think you know something or do something better than anyone else to the point where you won't listen to somebody else's ideas. It's very important to listen to everyone's ideas. You may have an excellent idea yourself, but to establish those relationships, and sometimes you're going to run into people that may be difficult to work with, but it is very important to maintain those relationships. You know, don't push anyone away. You know, even at the moment they may not seem important to you, but they may become very important to you.
What are some of the things that you would advise them to do?
I believe education to the community, education to the leaders in charge is very important. People need to understand what you're trying to do so you can accomplish good things. And if they understand how important this is for these children and for other victims, then I think the education is a very big issue.
I'm a court lawyer, so I'm primarily interested in how the courts can function to help victims. So we implement domestic violence programs, elder abuse programs, and we find that court access so that victims can get into court and get the orders that they need is very important. We also try to have good linkages with the Navajo Nation Victim Assistance Program, which is within our law enforcement department, behavioral health, social services, and then identify programs in the community where we can link. And behavioral health with the Indian Health Service is very important as well. Within our own system, we're finding that competitive grants are a very poor way of doing business. We don't set the agenda on what is done, and we have to be responsive. We also are linking with victim assistance programs that are very important to judges as a resource for both criminal and civil matters. So the idea that there will be ongoing, reliable, steady, and adequate sources of funding is very important to us, and you can't do that on pass-through money or competitive grants.
Now, a big plus for your program at Warm Springs is the volunteers.
Oh, yes.
How do you recruit? How do you keep them? And how do you maintain their energies?
We advertise through our tribal newspaper and through our radio station, and then some of our volunteers who kind of get tired and get a little burnout and they want to take a break, they'll talk with their family members and friends, and they'll come in and contact us, and we'll let them know what the volunteer program is all about, go through all the rules, the procedures, the everything, confidentiality, and then we let them know, you know, if they want to sign up and be part of the program, they're welcome to. They go through training, and then the first time they go out, they usually go out with somebody who's been there for a while, like Laura or Sister Pauline or Perthina, and learn firsthand on how to deal with victims of crime, and then plus the training we have. And at the end of each year, which we consider like in February or January or February, we have a banquet for them that we fund ourselves. We go out and we ask for donations, and other family members, my own family, Laura's family, come together and donate money, and we buy gifts for all the volunteers. Last year we bought T-shirts for everybody, and Foster's an artist, and we had one of his drawings on the back of that, and everyone got a T-shirt. And we let them know, and we praise them and let them know that they are very appreciative, you know, of what they, you know, the time and energy they take to deal with people. Sometimes they have to get up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and leave their family, and then still get to their 8 o'clock job. And I always go and see them at their job. If I know that they had to get up and go see somebody, I'll go see them at their job, make sure they're okay, and that, you know, that their boss knows that they was out. And a lot of the supervisors that know that their people are volunteering my program, if something comes up or they feel that it's interfering, they let me know right away, and we sit down and we talk it out. So I'm real lucky to have a lot of supervisors who support the program, and yet we try to help them out with their work too.
So then they know that what they do, that it's appreciated and people care about the time that they devote. Mm-hmm. Good. Confidentiality problems, what are they?
The way I see it is because our reservation is very close-knit, and a lot of times it's family, close family. If something happens, and we have a lot of people who know about it, like right away, and would come and say, what can I do? How can I help? And a lot of times we tell them, well, it's very confidential, we can't give out information. And sometimes it's really hard for family members to understand that. But basically with confidentiality within as the staff members and volunteers is very good. They know, they sign a confidentiality form, we go over it, we review it at least 2-3 times a year to remind them, and it's pretty, you know, they're pretty good about keeping confidentiality.
Let's say we're in the position of putting together a new VAIC program on my reservation. Where do I go for information on how I access victims' compensation funds for the people that are going to be in my jurisdiction?
I think the best thing to do is to actually establish a personal tie with people in the Victim Compensation Office. All states have victim compensation programs, and I think it's very important that they get to know the people in the field who are providing the services. And I think vice versa, it's good for the service providers to get to know the people in the Victim Comp Office, develop a rapport with them so they have an understanding of their issues and the kinds of victims that they're going to be submitting claims for. I think it's pretty typical that a lot of state administrators in comp programs don't have an understanding for the kinds of services that are available on the different reservations. And a lot of programs will say that Indian Health Services and other types of federal programs are covering all these expenses and all these needs. And I think for the most part that's not true, and that these state administrators need to know exactly what services are available and what services are not available and where they need to go out off the reservation to get adequate services for their victims. And once they understand that and have an understanding of that, then I think they'll be more likely to accept compensation claims on those issues.
Now, claims involve filling out forms, and a lot of people don't like to fill out forms or feel that if they're handed a form to fill out, that means they're just being put off.
I think that's part of the victim advocate's role in the field, is to assist the victim filling out that form. Probably 90% of our victim applications are filled out by victim advocates during a discussion and interview process with the victim. And then the victim signs it, reads it, understands it, and signs it. But it's very important that the victim advocate be knowledgeable and experienced in how to fill out the form and make sure that the right information is put on it.
Is the Victims' Compensation Fund supposed to be looked at as kind of the last resort, are other resources to be applied for first, like for instance Indian Health Service, BIA Social Services, or whatever? Is there a requirement by some state administrators that they exhaust those possibilities before they access the crime victims fund?
All the states require that all other collateral sources be accessed first. And that's part of the state's job administratively, is to determine that those efforts have been made. So a victim advocate should make sure that the victim is aggressively pursuing those other sources. And then if there's things that are left over that remain to be paid, or services that remain to be provided, they can then go to the state's compensation program for assistance with those.
Now, is the fund flexible enough, or do you have enough discretion so that you could help to pay for traditional healing or some kinds of traditional relief from a crime?
This is something that varies throughout the country, state by state. In New Mexico, we do provide for payment for traditional healing, and I think this goes back to what I said earlier about the victim advocate needs to establish a rapport with the comp program, needs to educate them as to the significance of traditional healing and the advantages to the state in being able to provide that type of healing, which in a lot of cases will be superior to the more conventional therapy and therapists which might be available, which the compensation program may work with daily. And I think that's part of the interaction that has to happen. You have to have the state's program aware of the benefits to the victim of traditional healing.
And that's not an easy task.
I think it's very difficult, and I think that it's the burden is upon the victim advocate to make those contacts. And a lot of people say to me, well, I'm waiting for the state to call me and the state doesn't come to me. And my attitude is, you're an advocate for the victim. Let's be the advocate. Let's go to the state. Let's establish a rapport with the state. And it takes work, it takes effort, but it's well worth doing. And I think in the long run, you'll be providing a tremendous service to your victims by doing that.
What are the big problems that VAIC programs encounter, you think, in Indian country?
I think in able to have your program off and running, everybody has to pitch in and do their part, meaning the U.S. Attorney's Office, the criminal investigators on a reservation, the FBI, the tribal court, and the victim assistance people. All of those have to interact and able to have program off and running.
So it's important to build those interagency relationships.
Yes.
Do you cover things like traditional healing methods?
Yes, we do. In the state of Arizona, especially in the northeastern part, which is my county, which covers the Navajo reservation. The Navajo reservation are very traditional people, and the majority of our claims, maybe 90–95% of them, when it comes to traditional healing compared to regular counseling, the victims will prefer traditional healing.
It's a pretty sensitive area when somebody's coming in and wanting to be helped for funeral expenses and that kind of thing. What would you advise somebody at the victim's advocate level, at the VAIC level?
I think that first of all, you got to have respect for the victims. You have to respect all people. But what I do is I don't really go overboard in helping people. I just listen to them. In fact, I listen more than anything else. And I try to accommodate them as much as possible.
Tell us what you think some of the first steps ought to be to making sure the program's going to be workable.
The training, the basic training is very important. It's very critical to have an understanding what it's like to be a victim, what it's like to be a victim of the most serious crimes that happen: homicide, rape, domestic violence, and the property crimes too. So the foundation is very important, and to make sure that you have access to training, to the trainings that an organization like NOVA can provide, or someone who's been trained by the NOVA to understand what is a victim's reaction to crime, what type of a crisis reaction is there, what types of feelings, what's the shock reaction, what's that shock reaction, and what are the emotions, and how does someone recover from crime, and what type of support services. And so those are important to think about how you're going to provide them, and to make sure that you have those skills to provide them. And if you don't have those skills, where can you go and get that basic training?
What a new person shouldn't do in setting their program up. What are some of the no-nos?
If you're a victim advocate and you're a crisis responder and you're helping someone with the police or with social services or through the court system, you really need to have an understanding that that's your job to help that person in that situation, and not really to take on the victim's whole life. It's very tempting to want to do that. But as one advocate and just one human being, you just can't do it. You just don't have enough energy, you don't have enough hours in the day. So I think you really need to have clearly in mind what your job is and to understand that, and be able to find the resources that will supplement what you have done.
I guess one of the biggest things for me and a challenge is not to give up. I guess when I first started and I looked at an investigator, they were having a difficult time interviewing a child. They couldn't get down to their level. So I sat there and thought, it did happen to that child. So believing in that child and how you can help the victim, I mean, that's the ultimate goal that keeps me going, is I help that one person. And how can we keep going with it?